Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Bite clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest will bring with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, we are so excited to have Romola Garai on. She is an actress you've seen in films like Atonement and The Last Days on Mars. She's also a writer and director. Her debut feature film is the gothic horror film Amulet, which is currently out on VOD. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're incredibly excited to talk about Amulet. It's one of those movies that, like, it's so weird, but it's so fantastic.
Yes.
Very weird. I'm very, very comfortable with that.
Okay, good. Because I found it absolutely delightful, but it goes into some very icky territory. But before we get into that, what was your first introduction to horror? What was your entryway into the genre?
Well, I mean, it was interesting for me, obviously, like trying to think about what to bring along today, because I mean, I think the first time I ever remember being really afraid, probably along with everybody who was born in 1982, like me, is watching The Last Unicorn. That is the time.
Oh my God.
My God. We just talked to someone about The Last Unicorn, and it is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah, and now I have children, and of course, like, I am now traumatizing them in the way that I was traumatized as a child. But I mean, I look back on that trauma, my early trauma watching that film, and the terror that I felt as being like a creative awakening. Whereas my sister was like, why are you showing that film to your children? It's just evil. Why would you do it? So that was the first time I remember ever being like really scared watching a film, but I mean, not really a horror as such. And then I would suppose I would have to kind of jump cut forward in time to watching something like the Blair Witch Project, which probably came out in like my mid-teens, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then after that, I kind of got more into the amazing kind of back catalogue of the genre.
That's amazing.
That is awesome. You just probably like made Mary Beth really happy because she loves the Blair Witch Project and she loves The Last Unicorn.
Oh no, it's an amazing film. It's an amazing film. Nothing but deep respect for the brilliant filmmaking of the Blair Witch Project. Incredible film. Yeah.
You have been in the film industry for a while. You're an amazing actor. And so how did you go from acting to directing?
Well, and I suppose I started acting when I always say I was quite young. And then I think about all those American people who started when they were like 5. But I mean, I kind of fell into acting, I suppose, and I got a role when I was 16 that I was very, I was very much at school. It wasn't kind of a plan or anything. I'd not done any professional work. And then I went straight from school into working professionally as an actor. And I did that until I was, well, I'm still doing it now, but, until I was about 25, 26, I suppose. And then I started to think about how I just didn't really feel like I was doing something that scratched my creative itch enough. Mm-hmm. I love acting. Mm-hmm. It's an incredibly transformative thing, but you're always somebody else's vessel. And I just struggled with that a bit, I think, after a certain point. So I started writing, and then I kind of wrote a lot of terrible things that were not, suitable for human consumption for a really long time. And then I made my short when I was 30, and then, and then I started developing features after that. So I suppose, it's been a long time to kind of get a feature made, but I've been trying to get a feature made and working towards that for quite a long time.
That's so amazing. That's so exciting that this
really is
happening.
Yeah, no, I know. It's sort of, for sometimes you don't take the time, do you, to go like, this is, been 10 years of my life. I've been working towards this, and now I've done it. Actually, it's kind of not a particularly pleasant feeling sometimes, because you kind of, like when we were at Sundance with the film, and I was sitting there watching everyone watch it, and me going, wow, this is like 10 years of my life that I've poured into this moment. It feels like a lot of pressure.
Wow.
So you've been working on getting this made for about 10 years. When did you start with how did you come up with, I have so many questions about this movie. I'm kind of all over the place, but what is Amulet about? Let's start there.
What is it about? I mean, I suppose I started off thinking that I wanted to write a horror film. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to write a horror film where it had a male protagonist.
Okay.
I knew I wanted to write about body horror. Mm. The films that I really love are, I really love Cronenberg. Mm-hmm. I'm very excited by, I suppose, when you go into kind of creature work and less ghost stories and things like that. I suppose I'm more interested in the body than the mind in that way.
Okay.
And so I knew I wanted to write something where somebody was going to have their body tortured in some way. And maybe because I am a woman, I didn't want that to be a woman. So, I ended up with a male kind of protagonist. And then I think I was also I was thinking a lot at the time, and I don't know why I was thinking this, but I was thinking a lot about how forgiveness is something that I was starting to feel a bit uncomfortable with, this idea that you can just give forgiveness to anyone under any circumstances, that it's sort of Christian idea, and that, I was kind of thinking, well, but don't people have to want to be forgiven? Don't they have to ask for it in some way? Otherwise, how do you kind of go about propagating any real change? And I think that was something that just got me going. I ended up with a male protagonist who just was refused to accept that he wasn't the hero.
Right.
That's really what it is, that it's just a man who is the hero of a film. And even when presented with a lot of evidence that he's not a hero, he refuses to kind of give up that position and that understanding of himself. And I think that's kind of what got me started.
And speaking of your male protagonist, what a fantastic actor. I'll tell you, when I saw him come on screen, I screamed in my home because I love God's Own Country. Yeah. And I was like, I was so happy to see him in another feature and doing something completely different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we cast Alec, firstly, obviously, because he's an amazing, wonderful actor, but also because he's just the most sympathetic presence you could possibly imagine. Just like those big eyes. And
he's a sad puppy dog.
He's a sad puppy dog, I would never, ever imagine him to have the capacity for any kind of evil. So it was perfect, because you can really kind of play with that idea of what happens when people are just completely in denial about what they're capable of, and we could really protect the audience from that information. And it was a very different experience for him, I think, because you know, he's obviously done lots of other work apart from God's Own Country, but to come onto a film like this, where this film literally tortured him, you know, he had to like have prosthetics all over him and pull things out of toilets and ended up with blood all over him. And it was not an easy experience. And he was, you know, incredibly patient and understanding and about the whole experience, which wasn't always a barrel of laughs.
You kind of you just briefly mentioned kind of the defying expectations of having him. You needed someone that was going to be kind of that warmth figure, that kind of puppy dog look, while you're also subverting that expectation. And I'm just kind of curious. I was an English major. I grew up reading a lot of Gothic literature, both like Gothic romances, Gothic horror for college. And I'm curious what your inspiration was for the kind of setting and the tone, because for me as a English nerd, there's a lot of like Gothic traditions that are in this movie that you slowly start to subvert over the course of the runtime. And I'm just kind of curious what your inspiration was and if that was purposeful.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's a Gothic horror. Yeah. There's all of the tropes, you know. There's a mad woman in the attic.
Attic.
You know, there's a nun. You know, you can reel them off, those sorts of tropes. And I think, maybe because I've never been in an adaptation of like one of the kind of Victorian ghost stories like The Moonstone or anything, but I definitely, you know, like you, I grew up reading a lot of Victorian novels and Gothic novels, and Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre are kind of deep in my kind of consciousness in that way. And I think like, because it was one of the sort of early things that I wrote, I think there was a sort of an awareness of the kind of conventions of the genre very consciously in the film, and a desire to subvert them. So all of the tropes that you see, you know, a young woman who's in need of help, a man who comes to her rescue, an elderly woman who is a source of evil and threat, like all of those tropes needed to be there in order to kind of explode them somewhat, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, and you explode them.
Yeah, I do, don't I? Yeah. You could say I sort of atomically explode them. And I guess maybe, as you say, it comes from kind of being a fan of that genre that deals so much in kind of archetypes and really wanting to kind of have some fun with that.
Well, and that's the thing that really kind of clicked in with me, because I've talked with a couple of my writing peers, and different things have kind of grabbed them about this. But the thing that I was like literally like snapping my fingers at in the most gay fashion was all of the little times it'd be a trope that was like a little bit off, or even in some of them just were like completely subverted. And I really enjoyed the use of the past with Tomas. When he was in the past, it almost had like an Eden like feel to it, where it's just him and this woman in this beautifully verdant green forest. And then you have like the present, which feels kind of out of step with the present. Like if it weren't for the fact that you have, I don't know how to pronounce the band's name, or the artist's name, Polika.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With that club scene, this could almost be set at any time in like the past.
Yeah. And I think I wanted to try and do something where the film did feel out of any kind of recognizable time period, with the exception of kind of contemporary London. I mean, I think, a lot of people are resistant to having like very oppositional sort of styles within a single film, that there's a sense that that's going to be kind of very jarring. But I wanted to kind of play with that. So my idea was that the flashbacks are, they're Edenic. They're kind of, it's very verdant. It's very lush. You know, we shot them with different lenses. We did different things in the grade, and that the forest is not sort of inherently threatening. You know, she comes to a place of sort of safety in the forest with its kind of lushness and the river, and it doesn't obviously suggest threat. Whereas the house, you know, was much more of a kind of sense of classic horror. We were going into, you know, literally a kind of haunted house with a mad woman in the attic. So, you know, we were using a lot of the color palettes and not knocked back kind of browns and reds that you see in kind of classic horror films from the 1970s. And then, you know, contemporary London was kind of going on outside And I suppose I just wanted to kind of, I mean, at one stage we'd actually thought about using different aspect ratios or even shooting part of the film on digital and part of it, on film, and really kind of pushing those worlds as far apart as possible. I suppose I just think when you have a film with two time periods, or you have kind of any piece of work that has very kind of opposing forces in it, sometimes it's better to push them further apart rather than bring them closer together, so it doesn't feel like a mistake, or you're not trying to kind of paper over any kind of cracks. You're happy to kind of let different parts of the film be very, very different. But it wasn't super easy in the edit. It did make things kind of challenging.
I can imagine. You mentioned the house as well. From what I understand, it was kind of a found house that you were able to work with on the inside. Is that true? Or how did you design this house? Because it's kind of a cliche to say, but it is kind of a character in this movie. Yeah, well,
it was, I mean, literally like weeks before we were supposed to start shooting the film, and we still hadn't had it. We still didn't have it. We'd gone through all the kind of usual things and scouting for locations, and we did actually find a house that was really great, and then another film went into it. But we were almost, I would say, a day away, maybe 24 hours away from having to just push the whole date to the film because we just didn't have it. And then somebody just said to me, why haven't you tried going on a property search finding engine and just type in derelict house, and I selected, recently exchanged, like I was going to come in and gazump someone, and actually, this house just came up. It popped up straight away. It had been lived in for 50 years. It was a big house. It was big enough to shoot in. And the couple that had bought it said that we could do anything that we wanted to it,
wow.
Started their building work. But it just meant that Francesca, our production designer, could just rip everything out. She painted all the walls. She changed the glass in the windows. There was, but the bare bones of the house were absolutely right. There was that, all of the kind of period detailing to get the sense of it kind of existing outside of time. It also had an amazing garden, but we discovered like really early on that the garden was full of this kind of poisonous weed.
Oh, of course.
We had been really excited to shoot in this kind of very overgrown garden. But then, of course, given the nature of the film and the kind of curses that get like dumped on your head if you try and make a film like this, it was very quickly realized that we couldn't do that. Otherwise, the poisonous weeds would, take over, steal our souls. So we couldn't do that. But the attic was a set build.
Okay. Oh, really? You had mentioned earlier talking about Cronenberg. I know some of the effects are probably visual computer generated effects or whatever, but how did you use practical effects for like the, spoiler alert, the bat and everything?
Yeah, I wanted to do all practical effects. That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
I grew up watching The Dark Crystal, and I love practical effects more than anything else. They are all I ever want to see on screen. I have literally no interest in visual effects at all. And so that was the idea. So we had, an amazing guy called Cliff Wallace who made the Bat Rat, which was a puppet, and, it was operated with 2 handlers, and it was, it was just absolutely everything that I wanted it to be, because, those people were able to move the animal with the actor. They could talk to each other on the set at the moment, they could really interact with each other, but we couldn't get wings on it because they would have needed another person to operate the wings, and we couldn't get another person. So the wings were added in visual effects. And then at the end, Carla is inside a full body mold, the suit of the kind of deity, the goddess that she is at the end. But the shell that she's inside, we couldn't build it. We couldn't afford to build it. So, that's visual effects. And then having said I didn't want to do any visual effects and I didn't want to work with them, it was actually an incredible part of the experience for me working with visual effects. And they were an incredibly creative and brilliant team. And they just, were completely on board with all of the references. And I bought them like thousands of pictures of, ancient tribal art and Renaissance paintings. And we had amazing kind of conversations about that. So in the end, it was visual effects and practical effects working very much in tandem.
So actually, that is a great segue to a little section. We're going to talk about some spoilers, if that's okay. So everyone listening, if you haven't watched Amulet yet, skip ahead. Well, what are you doing? And also skip ahead. We will place the time codes in the description of the podcast so you can skip the spoilers. So what I really wanted to talk to you about is Amulet as a rape revenge tale.
Yeah.
I've written a lot about rape revenge movies, and I feel like at this point I can kind of, sense the patterns, but this completely blew me out of the water as a rape revenge story. I was absolutely awed at the end, and I'd love to hear more about, I know that you've wanted from the beginning to kind of talk about how rape during war is kind of forgotten about, and I'd just love to hear more about you creating this kind of subverted version of the rape revenge tale in Amulet.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just got bored, like a lot of women do and did and will, with this kind of idea that rape is something that happens to women when they've put themselves in danger by strangers. Strangers attack women when they've done something that has put themselves in danger, which is just, as we all know, total bullshit,
Wrong.
So I think I really wanted to kind of make the protagonist a man that the audience completely took to heart in order to make that point as clearly as I possibly could, which is that, as is always the case in all conflicts, and I would say to a greater or lesser extent in normal life as well, if you change the dynamics of the gender, if you change the gender dynamics even a little bit, women can be at risk, and men too, from rape. And so that, I think, was my intention, was to make him entirely sympathetic. He's a heroic figure. Everybody understands what he's going to do. He's going to use his superior strength only for good. He's going to be violent. He's going to be cruel. He's going to be grotesque. He's going to have all of those qualities, but he's only going to employ them in the service of women and then protection of children and for the greater good. And that's just something that we all know isn't what happens, And so that was the idea.
Kind of going along with that, the thing that really struck me was, especially on a second watch, was how many times he's given the option to leave.
Yes.
One of my favorite lines is from Sister, is it Clara? When she's like, forward is not the only answer. There are other roads and stuff. And she hands him the phone at one point. There's all these options that he can leave, but he just has to save this woman, quote unquote.
Yeah, it was important for me to see him being given plenty of opportunities to take another route, because I think I sort of inherently feel like his desire to save her, to rescue her, is in some way idiomatic of the kind of ego that can go the other way in different circumstances, that there's a kind of, a connection between the kind of man who casts himself in a heroic figure and the kind of man who can be dangerous as well, and obviously that is not what we see almost all the time on film. We see the hero as a man with a special kind of status where he is violent, he is strong, he's, aggressive, but that's kind of, there is no consequence to him having those qualities other than good consequences, So I guess it was important for me to see what I think is true, which is that actually wanting to help people even when they've asked not to be helped.
Well, and that's exactly it. Is Magda tells him, I don't want your help. I don't know what you're doing here. I don't need your help. She even tells him that, and it almost seems like it kind of fuels that ego that you're talking about, that kind of protector / aggressor ego that he kind of envelops.
Yeah, and he's kind of turned on by it, He's like, I'm going to overrule you on this one because I know better about what's right for you than what you do. And like any right thinking human being in that situation, if somebody said, look, I really don't want you in my house, they would leave, they wouldn't take it upon themselves to stay. And, but I think what has been interesting for me, and I hope is something that works well in the film, is that I've had conversations with people who've been genuinely confused about him. And they've been like, but he's such a good man. And why did he do that one time really bad thing? And, and I think it's been interesting to me, and it has felt like the effort to kind of do that, to make him very good in lots of other ways, is worthwhile, because I think it does, pose questions that we still need to be having, and film still needs to kind of like delve into why it is that we've, have this kind of very primal need to have particularly male figures that we protect from any kind of analysis, and I think it's kind of worthwhile to ask those questions.
For sure. And you also, when you're talking about designing that final set piece with the deity and the shell, I would love to hear more about like the iconography that you pulled from for that part. We actually had a friend, Ryan Larson, who watched Amulet and went into a very deep dive into Kabbalah and Jewish religious imagery, and was like sending us all of these like theories he has about the use of Jewish iconography in the film. And I'd love to hear some more about that from you, if that's actually true, or if we're just digging too deep.
I have not looked at any Jewish Kabbalah imagery for this, I'm afraid.
Oh, wow, that's so interesting.
Although I would love to, because it sounds like me and your friend are kind of into the same kind of stuff.
He had like this, it was almost like that kind of Always Sunny in Philadelphia, like the board with like the like red lines going everywhere. They're like, this is the whole theory of what's going on. And I was like, oh, I can totally see that with like a lot of the iconography that was used in this movie.
Yeah, well, I think there were a few different things with the figurine that became Carla's sort of her figure as a deity, her suit at the end that she kind of steps into. I think the first things that I started looking at were just really early art, because I wanted it to be a pagan deity. So I think the first thing we started at was this really amazing object, which is in the British Museum, which is called Lion Man. And it's a really, really, really incredibly early piece of art. It's Neolithic. It's, it just looks like a carved stick with the head of a lion done in this kind of like simplistic folk art style. But it left a huge impression on me when I saw it, the thought that somebody was making a piece of art and it was an absolutely like integral part of the human experience and need to do that. And I think I've never really forgotten it. So when I came to them, we started off with a figurine which was shaped a bit like that object and it's pointed at the bottom, but with a head. And then we because the shell was very important, I liked the idea of the shell, something with this kind of inviolable exterior, but that is very sort of beautiful, exterior that hides something inside it, which, is often less attractive, like crabs or snails, or that became part of the design of her kind of her headdress. We also looked at a lot of African art. I think some of the pieces were from the 1600s. Some of them were later, some African masks. Yeah, and I suppose that the tentacles, the kind of, that was something that came out of a conversation that I had, I think, with the visual effects team, where I was like, look, he's climbing inside a giant vagina, okay? Like, it's a giant vagina, and I kind of want people to know that, but also not know that at the same time. And so I think one of those guys were like, well, maybe it needs to have more of a sense of being like a womb, So I think those kinds of those sort of curved tentacles, which look a bit like fallopian tubes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there were kind of a few different things going on there. Or you could say, amazing, in a therapeutic sense, a whole lot of stuff.
That's amazing. So Romola had a pretty strict schedule, so we just kept it to the interview and the movie that she brought with her today. So Terry and I are recording again our What We've Been Watching Recently separately. Terry, what have you been watching recently?
So I want to talk about two movies.
Okay.
The first is a movie that happens when you barely have a script, rely on actors who look like they're in their 30s, improvising most of their sparse dialogue to be teens.
Okay.
And a shit ton of stock nature footage.
Oh.
You get The Prey, a nice little nature documentary with a side of murder. Put it on the box.
Put it on the box.
It's another one of those Arrow movies that I'm watching that has this kind of cool cover.
They always do, man.
I know, right? That's what I've noticed. And it is boring. It is probably the most boring slasher I have ever seen in my life.
Wow.
It's like literally most of the movie is comprised of stock nature footage. And what I mean by that is that they actually just went with stock footage. Like some of it is B-roll that they captured of this like nature things. It's about these 30-year-old teenagers that are going camping, and they get stalked by someone that is horrendously burned from like 40 years ago. There was a forest fire.
Ah, yes. We love a good disfigured person as the villain trope.
Yeah. And so he like stalks them and kills them in really boring ways. I mean, he uses a sleeping bag to like smother one. I mean,
okay.
It's really, it's like, I feel like this came out in 1983, I believe. It was one of those movies where like, I feel like they were just riding the kind of coast of the slasher craze. Where everyone's like, I can make a slasher film. All I need to do is have people get stalked by someone. But man, there's a point where like I feel like they had to add heartbeats to the killer POV moments, because otherwise it would have just looked like the B stock film that they were using.
Holy shit, are you serious?
Yeah, there's like all these like POV moments that in like, you know, a better slasher movie would be like, oh, it's the killer point of view. But they used heartbeats because otherwise it's literally just them looking at nature.
Wow. Wow.
I don't know what to say about this movie. It has like a really fucked up ending. Like really fucked up.
Was it worth it?
No. Like I really wish I could have said yes, but man, this one was a mess.
And you own it. You own that. That's yours forever. That is your property. You probably spent like a lot of money on that movie.
I did. I did. Oh man, and I'm realizing how many of these movies I'm gonna have to go through that might be the same. I mean, you know, it's one of those things where it's like I'm really glad that like movies are not being lost to time. I think that, you know, boutiques are doing a good service for that, but sometimes there's a reason why people don't know movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I always think that. I'm like, I'm so glad that people are preserving these things and selling them and like giving them like their due. And then at the same time, it's like, but aren't there other movies that we could be concentrating our energy on that are not like terrible?
Yeah. So this one literally, like, I guess there's another cut out there that is longer, but scraps the nature B-roll and adds additional stuff to it. Like I'll be honest, there is like no plot to this movie. There's like nothing. The dialogue is that kind of, you know, that kind of like people in the background just having like a B-roll conversation. Yeah. Where it's like they might be saying raspberry, raspberry, raspberry under their like breath. That's basically the dialogue in this movie. It's so
oh my God.
Wow. It's yeah. I don't want to trash it too much, but like seriously, I was surprised at how terrible it was.
Wow.
But on the other spectrum, I did, and I know you saw this one too. I saw Impetigore.
Yes, Impetigore. I know I like this more than you, but
yes,
still.
But it reminded me. Okay, so it's by Joko Anwar. Is that how you pronounce his name?
I believe so.
Who did Satan's Slaves, which is a fantastic Conjuring-esque movie.
Yes, 100%.
This feels to me like he is riffing on the kind of Southern Gothic movies we've seen in America.
Yeah.
Or like, I mean, there's some definite homages to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, especially towards the end. Yeah. So I feel like this is kind of like another riff on an American classic that is given an interesting spin. I found it to be, the premise is that Maya, this girl named Maya, in a very chilling opening, gets attacked by a man who we find out wants to kill her because she actually has a history with this small town, and her family apparently left with a curse on the town. And so people want to kill her in order to end this curse. And the curse is vicious.
The curse is fucking vicious. Good God.
And like, I loved about 3/4 of this movie. And I mean, we kind of talked offline, but I feel that there's a point in the third act where like, it's like exposition dump flashbacks. And there was one that just kept happening and happening and happening. And it kind of stopped this movie from going over into the great category with me. I think it's very good, but I feel that was a stumble for me. But what did you think of it, Mary Beth?
I fucking adore this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was about this movie that really like, the exposition dump, I will agree, is like pretty weird, but I think the setting isn't, I think the way that it's shot is beautiful. There's a lot of really beautiful reds and the lighting is awesome. The chemistry between Maya and her friend Dini is absolutely phenomenal. Like phenomenal. It is like, they feel like they are really best friends in real life. Like their back and forth and their relationship is amazing. And I think it really got under my skin. I don't know. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like, fucked me up. Like that movie fucked me up, which it probably did for a lot of people. So I'm gonna come onto our podcast and talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right? Why isn't that happening?
But I think I also am just like, I think another big part of this is I'm such a huge advocate for international horror films, and we don't see a lot of Indonesian horror. I mean, I feel like Satan's Slaves was one of the really first big ones that people are talking about, and I think it's absolutely amazing that Shudder is giving Joko Anwar such a platform.
Oh yeah.
I think from the opening scene is a fucking banger. Like it's and I just think it caught me from there, and despite some of like the issues that there might be with it, I was just enamored. Like, it just caught me. It caught my heart. It caught my brain. It made me scared. It was gross. It was cool. I don't know. I just absolutely adored this movie and the storytelling behind it, and like the kind of ridiculously macabre, nasty story it weaves. Like, it gets so nasty. Oh yeah. But I love that, and I like the nihilism of the ending. I'll just say that.
I kind of felt like the stinger was kind of added. It didn't really work for me too much.
That's fair.
But I agree. I love the idea of the nihilism of what's going on here.
Yeah.
And kudos to the translation department. Like, sometimes some of the movies I've gotten from Shudder, the translation isn't the best, but this is really good. Like, yeah, and it really added to what you're talking about, the chemistry between the two leads. Like, it felt like a real conversation that you would hear, and I loved them so much. I wanted the whole movie to be about their friendship, trying to get this clothing, this kind of counterfeit almost clothing store going.
I think there's like the whole vibe of the movie, and I think this thing from Satan's. I need to rewatch Satan's Slaves, but the way that he shoots houses is so beautiful, and the way that he's able to make the houses that he uses are beautiful in the first place. Like, they're really awesome, like gothic structures, but the way he plays with light and shadow in these houses and makes them so menacing and creepy and just like terrifying, I think I love that about his style. And I think he got much more like playful with lighting in this one, and much more stylized, which I love. There's so much awesome play with puppets and shadows and light. And it's like, he makes that, there's a puppet master in this movie, but he makes it go beyond just the puppet master scenes and really has light and shadow play a big role in the film. And I absolutely adored that. So, like I said on Twitter, Impetigore, more like Impetigorgeous. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. I can't disagree with you there. And I mean, let's not get it twisted. I think he should be talked about in the same level that we're talking about some American directors that are. He is phenomenal. You can see the ambition in this movie. Yes. It definitely steps it up from Satan's Slaves, even if in my opinion it kind of falters a bit. It still is an incredibly ambitious movie, and I think I can't wait to see what he's going to do next.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. There's a silver lining, I think, to COVID at this point, where it's like, okay, we can't go to the movies, but there's so many good things coming out on demand that I think it's getting more attention to these indie releases. I haven't looked at actual numbers to prove this thought at all. This is just my hopeful thinking. But I'm just so glad that there's more time to be watching indie film, more time put into marketing and Pedagore, more time that can be given to watching these things that you might not have given the time of day to.
Yep.
And so I'm just hoping more people see it and more people really embrace horror from that part of the world, and maybe it opens their eyes to Asian horror in general and just international horror, because that's really all I want, because his movies are just so good and they're on par / above a lot of the movies coming out in the States.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What else have you seen?
So I want to talk about a found footage movie I watched called Exhibit A, which is perhaps one of the most brutal movies I've ever seen. For those of you who have seen it and think I'm being a baby, fine. But the end of this movie is watching a snuff film.
Oof.
Ooh, my cat just sneezed. Bless you, Zucchini.
I heard that.
It's a snuff film. And the sad thing about Exhibit A, so Exhibit A is about a British family, and they're just run-of-the-mill dad, mom, brother, sister. And the sister has the camera, and she's she's really into photography, and she's recording their family. But she's also recording their downfall of their family and how some choices that her dad make just kind of make the family crumble. And so there's nothing supernatural about it. It's it's the horrors of real people and the desperation that people kind of go into. And it is just really upsetting and really disturbing. And really well done. I think it's beautifully done, but I think it's one of those movies that I don't know if I could ever watch again because the end is so brutal. And it's with found footage and the way that found footage does so many long takes, the long take at the end of this movie is I needed it to end. It was too much. But
Jeez.
And it's on Amazon Prime if anyone wants to experience it. And again, if someone has seen this and thinks I'm being a baby, I don't care. This movie fucked me up. It didn't scare me. It just made my soul hurt. And I don't think I wanted that at that moment. I don't think I realized how brutal it was going to be. So I definitely left. Well, I'm not left because I just turned off my computer, but walked away feeling very empty.
Ugh.
That being said, it's an amazing found footage film. It's just it's one of those found footage films that you're oh, there's no monster. It's just people being awful. And then
just people being people.
And it's the dad does a lot of things where he thinks he's doing good for the family and it ends up being terrible.
Oh, those are always the worst.
And it's just so sad because you kind of can see the trajectory of what's going to happen. But it's and that happens with a lot of found footage. At the beginning, they tell you it's murder footage. And so you're slowly putting together what's going to happen, but you can't make it stop. And that's even harder where you're where this is going. And it's heart-wrenching that you can just, the outcome, but you can't stop it. Which is something I kind of love about found footage. It makes it so much more difficult to watch in some cases because you're
it makes you feel kind of present or
exactly.
It makes in some ways.
Exactly. And there are parts where the person holding the camera changes, which is really fascinating to me too. And how that changes how you're viewing the world, which again, I'm always very fascinated in that because a lot of times found footage doesn't change camera person. And so in this case, it's a very marked moment where they change the camera person, and it completely changes the tone of the film. So I'd recommend it if you're feeling watching something fucked up. It's hard to recommend this movie because I think it's really well done, but I also think it's deeply upsetting and horrifying, especially if you're a parent. If you have children, please tread with caution watching this movie because I know it will be very upsetting to you if you have a child.
Jeez.
But I'm glad I watched it. It's the weird shit we put ourselves through for horror, I swear to God. My friends are oh, what'd you watch? I'm oh, this horrible fucked up torture porn movie. And they're oh, cool. I watched not that. I'm I loved it. It was a great experience. It's wild. But yeah, That's what I've been watching. Folks, that's what we've been watching. And so we'll get back to the interview and get back to talking to Romola about the movie she brought with her today. So Romola, what movie have you brought with you today that scarred you for life?
Okay, so I would really like to talk about An Awfully Big Adventure.
It's a very heavy season, and you're all going to have to work very, very hard. But you're all the very best people we could find. Oh. For the money.
All Stella Bradshaw ever wanted was to be a great actress.
I hope she's not in for another disappointment.
Well, if she is, I've told her this time she'll end up behind the counter in Woolworths.
To be taken seriously.
I live here.
Of course you do. I think that's charming.
Most of all, to be loved.
Would you like to dance?
What she needed was someone who would appreciate her.
That girl is in love with you too. Stella by starlight.
Shall I give you a lift home?
Teach her.
There are things come first.
And start her off.
When somebody loves you like that, make the most of it.
On an awfully big adventure.
I shall give her a part.
In a world of make-believe.
Why can't we start?
She's about to discover.
Meredith, up to his usual nonsense.
The difference between true love.
Don't you love me just a bit?
No, I love another.
They're made for each other.
And real life.
The play's about innocence.
I'm learning, Mother.
If you can't see the truth, give me make-believe. I prefer it.
Alan Rickman, Hugh Grant, and introducing Georgina Cates as Stella. From director Mike Newell, who brought you Enchanted April and 4 Weddings and a Funeral. An awfully big adventure.
Okay, listeners, this is our first kind of non-horror drama, and believe me, it is horrifying. So for those of you unfamiliar with An Awfully Big Adventure, here is the synopsis. We don't quite know how to describe the film, and the IMDb summary is not great, but here we go. Set right after World War II, a naive teenager named Stella joins a shabby theater troupe in Liverpool. During a winter production of Peter Pan, the play quickly turns into a dark metaphor for youth as she becomes drawn into a web of sexual politics and intrigue. So, how old were you when you watched this movie?
So the reason I chose it, because I realize it's kind of cheating, and I feel very bad about cheating with the idea of the podcast and everything, is that so I was taken to see this film when I think I was 12.
Oh wow.
Oh my God.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I still have not really got to the bottom of this, but my parents took me to see it in the cinema.
Wow.
Yeah. So I realize not everyone listening to this will have seen the film, but for anyone who's seen the film, that will have, I hope, the kind of appropriate level of like shock and disbelief. I think what happened was, I think that they were my parents really loved cinema and they loved the theater, and they were trying to introduce me to like adult thing, you know? And
this is like the deep end.
yeah, a bit too much, mate. And they kind of, my memory is that they made kind of a big deal about it as an outing.
Oh, okay.
I have a sister who's very close to me in age, and we were always lumped together and everything, but it was like, you are coming with us, not your sister, and we're going to go and see this movie, and it's in an art house cinema. It wasn't in our like multiplex.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to have some dinner beforehand, and it was like a whole...
It's a special event.
And so I go in and I sit down and I'm like, oh, Hugh Grant, your 4 Weddings. I love 4 Weddings. It's probably going to be like that. And, I'm watching it and it's about a young woman. So I'm like, okay. And she, was into acting. I was into acting. I was kind of, I was watching it and I was thinking it's not as funny as I thought it was going to be, because I was expecting it to be like a drawing room comedy.
Yeah.
And the film progresses, and then there's like quite a lot of kind of like very gross sex in it between this like incredibly young woman and Alan Rickman, who I find very, very attractive. But I mean, there's a huge age gap between them.
I shouldn't quite like that, There are things come first. Lots of things. For instance, you have to take your knickers off. Or shall I?
In the film, and that, I was sat next to my mum,
Oh my God.
It was, obviously extremely uncomfortable. There's one point where the central character, Stella, like whacks off a guy in the cinema.
I'll wait for you after the show. Take you for a drink.
And, it's just a lot about sex and a lot about loss of innocence. And, I wasn't from a family where people talked about sex, and it was just so uncomfortable. I felt like my whole body went into a kind of traction, where like I became like unable to move with like pain and discomfort, to the extent where I think, you know, I was literally almost thinking like maybe I should just fake appendicitis, or I should just faint, or like I have to kind of, it was just kind of, it's seared into my brain. And then the end comes.
Jesus. The end.
The end comes. And I didn't know what had happened. Like I think psychologically I was blocking it, you know? I just was like, I don't really understand, you know?
Valid.
Yeah. And I was just in such kind of confusion. And then there comes this kind of like significant point in the film after, you know, I can talk about everything that happens in the
Oh yes.
Oh yes.
Spoil it away.
After Alan Rickman realizes that he's been fucking his daughter, you know, he goes to go and kill himself. Throw himself off the end of a pier or something, and then he can't quite do it, you know, because he's a bit of a coward, and then he just ends up kind of falling over and falling into the sea. And which I quite like, because I think, you know, the writer kind of like refused to give him any kind of dignity at the end, which I think is cool.
Yep.
It's kind of cool, but you know, it was only at that point in the film that I realized what had happened. That he, you know, I think it just took me a while to understand. So it wasn't until he fell into the, you know, the sea, and I went, oh, yes, good. You know, like I was like, yeah, I'm glad you fell in the sea, you arsehole. I had this sort of very delayed reaction to it, and I was really angry. I was so angry and like really happy that he died, and then also, you know, I think the other thing that I found very challenging about watching the film was that my mum cried. From my memory was that she cried throughout the whole film. Like I watched it again the other night, and I was like, I still don't really understand what it was she was crying about, you know. But I'm guessing that she knew the novel maybe, and knew what was going to happen. Like it was just so disturbing to be sat watching that film with your parent. With one of them is like weeping, you know. Yeah. So I guess what I'm talking about is the kind of horror that's associated with growing up, and I think that the film is also about that. It was a process for me of like what I thought was going to be a wonderful night of kind of being initiated into adulthood in a kind of celebratory like way actually became an initiation into like the horrors of adulthood, in that it was just like sitting in a room with your mum crying, and then watching people having terrible sex with your parents, and then going home in our kind of tiny little British car afterwards, where we're all like right up against each other and having a really awkward conversation, which was just, you know, what did you think of the film? Very interesting. Yes. Down these kind of dark country lanes, and then lying in bed that night and just thinking like, that is all I have to look forward to. My childhood is gone, and now all I have to look forward to is like misery and abuse and like weeping like on into the future. Like that's what it means to be an adult.
You know, that was my, when I was watching, because I had never seen this movie before, and I'll be honest, I'd never even really heard of it.
Neither had I.
Until you brought it up. But I'm sitting here and I'm watching this and I'm like, okay, I gotta know how old you were when you watched this, because I'm sitting here going, okay, this is about a young girl who is becoming an actress or wants to be an actress, and all of this horrible things that she goes through of everyone basically just using her the entire time for their own gratification or their own like a way of getting past their own trauma. It's just like, I'm like, God, I can't imagine watching this as a kid.
Well, I wasn't a child, but I was definitely, right. I mean, I was probably had quite a protected upbringing. So, you know, although I was just a teenager, it wasn't, you know, like I grew up in the West Country in the UK, and, you know, it's not like downtown Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, nothing happened where I grew up, and it all happened very slowly. So it was intensely, also because I think, you know, I very intensely kind of related to the central character, and, you know, her excitement about the theater, and, you know, what it was to kind of I mean, I have to say, I think it's an amazing film. And I think there was an almost total rejection of it because the film rejects the Hollywood dream. Like it takes to task the whole kind of basis and idea of kind of, well, I mean, obviously it's talking about the theater, but, you know, you could say that film is an extension of that, where it kind of eats youth, you know, like it kind of consumes it. But I was very much waiting for her to take, you know, for somebody to fall ill and for her to have learned all the lines. And then, you know, I thought it was going to be that movie. You know, I thought that she was going to end up playing Peter Pan in Peter Pan, and then her parents would come and watch it. And instead she ends up having sex with her father.
Right.
Yeah.
was not what I was expecting. Also because of Hugh Grant as well. Four Weddings having been so recently such a incredible hit. But I have to say, one of the other things I really, really love about this film is that Four Weddings and a Funeral is not the UK. This film is the UK. Like everything that you see in Four Weddings and a Funeral, which is about England, which is like one Cotswold village that they shoot for all of the films, you know, like An Awfully Big Adventure. Like that's England. That's like damp rooms and grumpy people and trauma. It's not the way it is in Four Weddings. Yeah.
No, not at all.
No. Wow. Have you read the novel? It was one of those things where I'm kind of curious how.
Yeah, I mean, to my great shame, I've not read it, and I mean, she's an amazing writer, Beryl Bainbridge, and I think, as from the kind of reading that I did over the weekend, it sounds like it's a very faithful adaptation of the book.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
There would have been I mean, if there was something that they were going to change, that a studio would have wanted to change, you know, I'm sure that they would have changed that, you know. Maybe it could not be her dad, then, you know, but I mean, I guess it is just very, very close to the book, and you know, all the better for it, I think.
The thing that really struck out to me watching it as an adult was how much she felt like she had to give herself away to become something for this man that she loves, Meredith, who is gay. So she does everything in her power to try to get with him because she thinks that that's what she wants. And so it really made me sad about when she finds out he's Catholic, she starts to put the crucifix in her sock, and, you know, she decides to use P.L. O'Hara as her sex tool to get better at sex, I guess. And it just made me sad that she's doing all of this for something that she's never gonna have.
Yeah, and I think what's amazing about it is that it's another way of looking at love, you know, you know, cinema is the great, you know, it's the great advert for love, isn't it? Love hasn't needed a kind of PR guy for a long time because it's got film, right? You know, and I think that this film really attacks that, you know, and it just says that she, as you say, she just trades every part of herself that she can. She gives everything of herself away. And that's partly because of this kind of trauma that she experienced as a child, where she was abandoned as a child. But then, you know, I think we can all relate to that sense where you're just, you know, at that stage in your life, you would just strip yourself down to nothing, you know, you would just raise yourself to the ground for love. And
I'm going to do everything I can to be something that this person wants.
Yeah, you know, and the sort of the lack of faith in yourself and trust in yourself that you have to kind of behave that way. And then, of course, how easily that makes you to manipulate.
Right.
And I think the Hugh Grant character is really interesting. And I love that line at the end that I think it's Alan Rickman. He says that line where he says,
"Believe it or not, doesn't much matter, him or her, old or young, to Meredith. What he wants is hearts."
Oh, he's not gay or straight. He just wants hearts.
Right.
Yes.
He's vampiric and absolutely, you know, enraged by and activated by power in its kind of purest form, in that he just needs to feel like he's having an impact on other people constantly. And I just think that is his performance, and the kind of characterization of that is one of the best kind of examples of that I've seen in a film. And I think even when I was watching it when I was just way too young to understand what the hell was going on in the film. Like 90% of the time, it really, really stuck out to me that he's laughing at her, that you can see that he's laughing at her and that she really doesn't sort of mind. Yeah, that she's just a toy in the film because of, Well, and also with her character, Meredith's character, I feel like you don't really, you see he's cruel, but there's a point, especially when it's like, starts calling him Jeffowy.
I am the Jeffowy, so just you be careful.
The Weffowy. And really starts, like, you can really they start exposing his cruelty, and it's almost like Stella is maybe slowly, she's still kind of enamored with him, but there's a cruelty to him that you don't see at first. And then I think that really comes to a point at the end when he plays Hook.
Yeah.
Which was crazy where, Alan Rickman's character is making the kids laugh and they're so excited and happy. And then with him, everyone is terrified of him.
Yep.
And he is just like that evil man who wants to steal children and wants to just collect hearts, collect people.
I think that's one of the great things about the film as well. Like you say, that's a really amazing moment in the film when you see Alan Rickman. He's playing a man who's obviously like incredibly flawed, but, not intentionally kind of evil. But so his performance is something that you can detect something beneath the performance, and what the children in the theater see when Hugh Grant is playing a Hook, what they can detect, which actually very few other characters can detect in the film, is just pure evil.
Yeah.
And they can feel the real threat there. And I think it's an incredible kind of device that they use in the film. It's really sophisticated, and interesting and also that text, Peter Pan is so creepy and awful anyway.
Right.
Yes.
Just terrifying and terrible that it's still kind of performed in really, and it's just such an interesting parallel for the story. Of course, this kind of disempowered young woman who's taken on this journey to like mother a lot of small boys who've never like grown up,
Well, and the thing that like as a gay man that really made me sad watching this was how careless he is with two people's hearts, with Bunny, the person that loves him more than anyone else in the world and does everything he can to protect him, and he just like tears him down at every single moment he can. And then there's poor Jeffrey, and going back to what you two were talking about, just the line where he said after he like headbutts him, which I loved.
He was wearing my bloody scarf, and he wouldn't even look at me.
He's like, he wore my fucking scarf and he wouldn't even look at me.
Yeah.
Like just this kind of this heartbrokenness where even, and then I going back to with Alan Rickman's character PL, when he even confronts him about it and he's like,
have you seduced him? Does he think he loves you? Are you playing games with him? I think you are.
And he even talks about how, which I think is hilarious because, as we just mentioned, it's not. He's like, the play's about innocence, not seduction or exploitation. Look at the play, man. But at that point, it's like, I love that he's using this as like a way to try to hopefully get to him. But at the same time, it's kind of funny because the play is not this innocent little non-exploitive little piece of storytelling.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's really telling that, the way that he's prepared to mock his voice, Jeff Wee, he's a traitor to his own people,
yes.
like he's a gay man, he's, and then he's prepared to turn on another gay man and use an homophobic arsenal to attack him in public.
Oh yeah, with Bunny when he says, stop fussing like an old queen.
Yeah.
I'm like, good God, man.
Yeah. No, he's a monster. And I think that's why I thought it would be okay for me to bring it, because, there are monsters, like the monsters in my film. And then there are monsters walking around in the world, eating hearts.
There's scarier monsters because they exist. Like, I feel like a lot of us probably know someone similar to that, or like have encountered someone like that in our lives. And like, that is terrifying. Oh, yeah. Like the way they can take advantage of you and enamor you and then throw you away. Like it is. And also there's the horrifying act of growing up, like watching this movie and really seeing how horrifying becoming an adult is and can really be. It is a horror story in a way, just in a different version of horror than what we're used to.
Yeah, and I think there's something I suppose there's something for me very much about my changing relationship as I get, as I'm older and now I have children. And I was talking to my husband after we watched it the other night, and I was saying, can you believe that my parents took me to see that movie, when I was 13, and I was going, what's wrong with them? And he was saying, but I mean, it's an amazing film for them to have taken you to see. Isn't that an amazing film to take a 13-year-old to see as well? Because it's like, look at the world. Look at what it will do. Look at the people in it, and it's not full of lies, and in a way I kind of think, yeah, maybe we should kind of get all 13-year-olds to watch An Awfully Big Adventure and watch out for people who potentially could be your dad,
Good God.
Well, and I don't even know what's worse, that or the realization at the very end of the movie where the person that she's talking to doesn't exist.
It's been awful. I haven't dared phone you. There was this man who seduced me. It wasn't my fault.
At the third stroke, the time will be 10:47 and 20 seconds.
I'm learning, Mother. I'm just bending down to tie a shoelace.
10:47 and 30 seconds.
Everyone is waiting round the corner.
The time will be 10:47.
Yeah.
That she's talking to her mom, but it's a recording of her voice and no one knows where she's at. She's possibly dead at this point.
Dead, yeah. Probably committed suicide or, yeah. No, I mean that there's no, I mean, it's a Greek tragedy. Yeah, there's no, she sleeps with her father dies, and then you realize that her mother abandoned her, that there's no hope. It's weird that the film wasn't bigger at the time.
Such a crowd pleaser.
It's the kind of movie you are only allowed to make in Hollywood if you've just made 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
There you go.
Like, he had to take all of the goodwill from that to make An Awfully Big Adventure.
Terry, how many calls to mom out of 5 do you give An Awfully Big Adventure?
Speaking of a dark way to rate this, it's one of those. It's a movie that I've watched it twice now to prepare for the podcast. And the first time I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it. But the second watch, when I started to see how they were layering, because I had a hard time keeping track of all the characters, because there's a lot of characters in it.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing, yeah.
And so I was trying to figure out who is who, and so I spent more time trying to orient myself than I did really enjoying the movie. And I think the second time I watched it, I started to realize all the little pieces, and it wasn't just the shocking reveals of that, she's sleeping with her dad, or that her mom is the person she thinks she's talking to is her mom, that you think she's talking to is her mom, is just a recording. It's the little things. It's the way all that we basically talked about. I actually enjoyed this on a second watch, and particularly after having this discussion. I think I would probably give it 3.5 calls to mom.
Okay.
Out of 5. What about you, Mary Beth?
I agree. I think I would give it 3 calls to mom out of 5 for me. I think it is a little bit confusing and orienting myself with the characters, but this, like you've said, I'm parroting what you said, this discussion has made me really appreciate the complexities of this movie and the way that it weaves together all of these tales of trauma into this little acting troupe, and like the way it subverts the typical Hollywood style. Like, this isn't a story of a young girl's success. This is a story of just like what it means to be in the world and exist in the world and just kind of exist. So I give it 3 calls to mom out of 5. Romola, what do you give this film?
I mean, what do people usually give their own films? 5. Always 5. I think that now, sitting here now, like watching the film with my husband or on my own, I would say, yeah, I would give it 3. But I think if I was sat in the cinema with a 13-year-old watching the film with them, I might bump it up 1 more. Just for pure, incredible discomfort.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about An Awfully Big Adventure. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up you'd like to share?
Well, I have, actually, since I made Amulet, I've been acting. So I've gone back to doing that. And I acted in a film that is coming to Venice this year called Miss Marks. And yeah, that's probably the next thing I have coming up.
Awesome. And do you have any social media accounts that anyone can follow you on?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Oh, perfect. Oh, don't apologize. It's probably better for you.
It's better for you.
I'm like the girl in that film. It's basically the 50s. You've called back to the
So, listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. Have you seen An Awfully Big Adventure, and what did you think? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, keep the conversation going by chatting with the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
Please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you to everyone for listening. Stay safe out there, everyone. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody please think of the children? Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.